that is going to make elections significantly cleaner in the state of Pennsylvania. Plus, we have more records about John Kerry and what he's been up to. He's like the mystery man in Washington, D.C. He has this job. No one exactly knows what he's doing or how much money he's spending or even who works for him. But Judicial Watch was able to get the information out. A lot going on this week. Of course, the big crisis of the week, and frankly, the crisis of the Biden administration, one that is existential in its threat to the United States, is the border invasion enabled, aided, and abetted by the Biden administration. It's the largest human trafficking operation in the history of humanity, the largest net migration, I would say, of peoples in the history of humanity, and all with the approval and encouragement, practically speaking, of the Biden administration. They pretend to be opposed to it while essentially allowing it to take place by not securing the border and turning people back immediately. Now, the focus has been on this so-called Title 42. I guess it's not so-called, it's an actual portion of federal law that was enacted or invoked in response to the COVID emergency that allowed essentially immediate turn back in a good way of aliens trying to cross the border illegally. Now, of course, they kept on coming back, but so it had limited effect. But it really helped secure our border more than it was previously secured. Now, that authority is supposedly lapsing or is lapsed as a result of the Biden administration's refusal to continue the emergency. The emergency is tied to health, right? Now, I don't know about you, but isn't it a health crisis still if illegal aliens are crossing the borders in massive numbers? Not just from COVID, but from other diseases and public health consequences as a result of this massive invasion? Of course. But don't be confused about, oh, well, we can't do anything because Title 42 is ended. Because the law requires, I would submit, and allows, and there's nothing certainly outside the law in terms of what Biden has to do in order to secure the border. I mean, current immigration law allows him to stop people from crossing the border or turn them back immediately. And of course, from the national security perspective, that the civilian workforce under DHS and the Border Patrol and Immigration and Customs Enforcement and those that are backing them up now, given the increased pressures there, can't do it, that he can deploy the military. I was semi-joking this week on Twitter and on social media. I think we just posted something earlier today that, I've got one neat trick for solving the border crisis. It's called enforcing the law. So you enforce the law, no one crosses the border. And of course, if you take national security seriously, if you take our nation's sovereignty seriously, you would ensure that obviously the open border that's practically there, and I know they argue whether there is an open border or not, but it's open. In the sense you cross, and it's unlikely you will have to go back. And if you cross, you'll be let into the country, and no one knows what happens to you after that. I mean, obviously that's a national security risk. And not only are Central Americans and South Americans taking advantage of it, but Chinese nationals are now taking advantage of it. The Venezuelans are taking advantage of it. Now, do you think Chinese nationals are crossing the border in large numbers without permission of the Chinese Communist totalitarian government? Oh, come on. So another way to solve the border crisis are 3 words issued to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or any other responsible defense official. And 3 words could be issued immediately by Joe Biden. Secure the border. And it would be over. Militaries are designed to secure borders. We've been doing it for generations here in the United States, abroad. We know how to do it. Our military could get it done in a heartbeat. But we don't want to do that, right? And by secure the border, it doesn't mean you stop the economy that is very important, frankly, for Mexico and the United States. It means that you stop illegal crossings, and the military can do that, while allowing illegal traffic to continue and commercial traffic and trade and such to continue. But, you know, the left, I keep on saying, this is a revolutionary period we're facing, and the radical left opposes the idea of secure borders and sovereignty. They don't believe in national sovereignty. And so one way to destroy America is to open its border. You have no borders, you have no country. And so I don't know about you, but the idea that 5 million people, at least 5 million according to reports, have come through already under Biden, and who knows how much more those numbers will increase under the current iteration of the crisis. But you know, we're losing our country because we're having folks who are here unlawfully present, you know, distort our national fabric under the law, economically, and in all sorts of other ways. And Americans have a right to secure borders. They have a right to a Republican form of government, right? That's something the president and the federal government is supposed to guarantee the states. How is it you can have a Republican form of government if a significant portion of your population isn't supposed to be there and has a right and a claim on your resources? With no vote, nor should they have a vote, but nevertheless a claim. I mean, it's bad enough we've got government that's out of control that thinks, you know, they're not answerable to the American people. Now we have foreign nationals coming to the United States by the millions, and they get to take our money, practically speaking. They take our money. It's not charity. This is government spending, taking money from American citizens to support foreign nationals who are unlawfully present. So this is the border crisis we're facing. And of course, it's as I said earlier, it's part of a human trafficking operation. So it helps the cartels. It helps the terrorist entities that work with the cartels. It helps our enemy governments and governments who want to see the United States taken down a notch, to put it mildly. It helps them, so it's a national security issue. And on top of everything else, it harms the children and families and human beings who are trafficked into the United States. If you love illegal aliens, meaning you want to protect their rights, you want them to be safe and secure, then you ought to stop illegal immigration. Those of us who want to secure the border are those on the side of human rights. Those of us who want to secure the border are on the side of civil rights. Those of us who want to secure the border are on the side of families. Those of us who want to secure the border are on the side of children who are being trafficked, and sexually trafficked, by the way, through Mexico into the United States. At least 250,000. And what happens is our government ends up bringing these kids who have been trafficked illegally. We end up participating in the trafficking by putting them with supposed responsible adults. Assuming that we can even track the news is recently, we can't even track these kids once they come in, even though we're supposedly responsible for where they go. So the Biden administration and those who support open borders are on the other side of human rights, are placing children and lives in jeopardy, are placing our national security in jeopardy, and are advancing the far left cause of destroying the United States of America. Now, Judicial Watch has been fighting for border security and enforcing the rule of law on immigration for as long as I've been here, which is 24 years, believe it or not. And, we've highlighted and challenged these sanctuary policies, which encourage illegal immigration and prohibit local police from helping enforce the law, because they're a force multiplier, right? No one should be here unlawfully and not have to worry about dealing with law enforcement of any type. But that's not the way these sanctuary cities work. They help illegal aliens remain here contrary to law. And now, of course, because places like Texas and Florida have been sending these illegal aliens from their states up to New York and Chicago. They're all complaining. Every town is a border town when your borders are open. And and the other solution is if the Biden administration isn't going to repel this invasion, our Constitution, and I don't have the exact language off the top of my head, but you can look it up. The states can get together and defend themselves against invasion, and they don't need anyone's permission to do so. Now, of course, if they did that, I'm sure the Biden administration would sue them in court, but that's a fight worth having if you're trying to save your state from invasion, don't you think? So I would encourage the governor of Texas, Governor Abbott. I know he's sent some folks down to try to help secure the border in recent days, but it's not enough. I mean, he's got to defend his border as if there's an alien invasion, because there is. And other states should work with him to do so as well. That means sending the National Guard of Georgia, of Florida, of Oklahoma, dare I say it, New York and Illinois, if those governors are serious about defending and upholding their state sovereignty. And, I've talked about impeachment of President Biden. I'll talk about it a little bit more. But if you're purposely not protecting the country from invasion and actually helping foreign nationals invade the United States, or if you don't want to use such strong language, avoid federal law, isn't that a reason for impeachment? I think it is. And the fact that Republican members of Congress are hesitant to talk about it, and of course Democrats don't want to talk about it at all, it's an indictment of our political class that a president can so dangerously place the country at risk, and no one wants to do anything about it in a way that stops it from happening immediately, right? So that's the big news of the week, and we'll see what happens. I mean, the Biden administration, I think, because elections are coming up, maybe they'll be a little bit more aggressive in defending the rule of law on the border, but I wouldn't count on it. I wouldn't count on it. Their way of handling illegal immigration is to let's put it this way, mislabel illegal immigrants as lawful immigrants. When you hear the word parole, what that means is they're allowing illegal immigrants to come into the country by the tens of thousands and offering them, quote, parole, meaning exemption from enforcement of immigration laws for a year or two, at least 2 years, I think. And then they say, oh, look, the numbers have gone down because we started abusing the law to give temporary amnesty to hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens. So you have to be on watch when it comes to the border because we're losing our country. We're losing our country in so many ways, but it's really quite explicit when millions of foreign nationals get to come into the country. And by the way, what does the left want to do once they're here? Again, they want them to get access to your government record, to government dollars, to get Obamacare. I know here in Washington, D.C., they want illegal aliens to be able to vote. And legal aliens. So the ambassador from Russia gets to vote in D.C. if they had their way. Plus illegal aliens from Venezuela get the vote. And that's the goal of the left, to eliminate the distinction between citizens and non-citizens in the governance of our nation. Again, the end of America. So the Biden corruption just gets worse and worse and worse. And it's interesting, we've had these new documents come out that make the Burisma scandal actually seem legit, right? In terms of legitimate activities by the Biden administration, by the Biden family, relatively speaking. Because the Burisma, was a company, right? And they hired Hunter Biden to be on their board of directors, and they paid him money. And one might argue there was a business reason for doing so, however corrupt and disreputable it was, right? But here we have these documents coming out as a result of whistleblowers pointing them out to James Comer, who runs the Oversight and Accountability Committee in the House of Representatives, and he's been able to subpoena bank records that show that Burisma, as I said, is relatively speaking, kind of normal corruption. You've got outrageous corruption going on with multiple members of the Biden family, according to new records uncovered by Comer, by going after these banking records of key Biden family members. Now, let me get to the section where I want to talk about that. There are two reports I want to get to. The first one is this report out of Comey. And here is the summary of the material. And I think it's worth highlighting because, I live it here, right? We all live it at Judicial Watch, so we know all these details. I read the reports, I see what folks are saying about it, but I know you don't necessarily have the time to do that. And I know specifically the media won't give you the details of Biden corruption because they're in the tank for him and they're trying to help him maintain his hold on power by suppressing information that could harm his campaign, just like they did with the Hunter laptop. This is the latest iteration of election interference, where core corruption issues are, and significant evidence of criminal corruption by the Biden family, implicating him, even Joe himself, are hidden by the big media. So this is why I think it's important we get into some detail here. And this is what Comer's committee found. They found a lack of transparency regarding the Biden family business deals. That's a charitable way of putting it. When President Biden ran as a presidential candidate, he assured the American people his family received no money from China. President Biden recently claimed the committee bank records regarding his family's receipt of funds from China are, quote, not true, unquote. The White House refuses to correct Biden's dishonest statements. The lack of transparency surrounding the Biden family's foreign business deals raises serious national security concern. So when they say lack of transparency, they're saying Joe Biden is lying. The committee has reviewed thousands of bank records via subpoenas. I think there were at least 4 banks subpoenaed. The complicated network of Biden family and associate companies created a web of over associates companies. The family members and their business associates created a web of over 20 companies. Most were limited liability companies formed during Joe Biden's vice presidency. So the suggestion is they were set up to benefit and maximize his power as vice president, or maximize personal profits from his power as vice president. The Biden family received millions of dollars from foreign sources. Bank records show the Biden family, their business associates, and their companies received over $10 million from foreign national companies. The committee has identified payments to Biden family members from foreign companies while Joe Biden served as vice president and after he left public office. They used business associates companies to receive the foreign funds. Despite creating many companies after Vice President Biden took office, the Biden family used business associates companies to receive millions of dollars from foreign companies. So that suggests concealment and money laundering. As he goes on to describe, after foreign companies sent money to business associates companies, the Biden family received incremental payments over time to different bank accounts. These complicated financial transactions appear to conceal the source of the funds and reduce the conspicuousness, I think I said that right, of the total amounts made into the Biden bank accounts. So essentially, cash went into one account and they took it out bit by bit and moved it into other accounts. Chinese nationals hid the source of the money. Chinese nationals and companies with significant ties to China, Chinese intelligence and the Chinese Communist Party hid the source of the funds by layering domestic limited liability companies. So layering means, 2 or 3 layers, right? The number of Biden family members is just incredible that are involved in this. As the committee traces additional financial transactions, the committee continues to identify new Biden family members who may have benefited from the foreign companies. And I think they've listed 9, including like a granddaughter of Joe's, Hunter's ex-wife, Haley Biden, Bo's girlfriend, or wait, Bo's widow, Hunter's erstwhile girlfriend at one point, his brother, his wife, I think one of their or 2 of their kids, at least 1 grandkid. So they're using children to launder money. That's how decrepit this racketeering operation is. So when you look at the various charts, and I think I tweeted out a good chart that show the ties to the Chinese, it's going to knock your socks off. And there's no way that the FBI could not know about this if they were doing a competent investigation of Hunter Biden over the last 5 years. Remember, Hunter's been under investigation for at least 5 years by the FBI, and they're still agonizing over whether to indict him. And you can bet this is something they don't want to have investigated. Indeed, we have more information that just came out a few weeks ago that I think Jordan and Chuck Grassley highlighted. Jim Jordan in the House, Chuck Grassley, senator from Iowa, And they reported that they had a whistleblower, a quite credible one, tell them that there was an FBI form that delineated an accusation by someone, so you don't have a lot of the details, that Joe Biden did something as vice president in exchange for foreign cash. So just outright bribery. And what Congress wants to know is what was done with that allegation. Was it investigated? Was it found wanting? Or, was it found credible and nothing was done about it? Or was it just buried? And so they asked for information from the FBI, and they've been given the runaround. And you can bet that Judicial Watch will sue for the information as soon as we're able to under law. Just so you know, it takes about 3 weeks between a request, typically, and because the states have, the government agencies have about 21 days typically to respond, sometimes a little bit more. So it takes a few weeks to a month before we can file a lawsuit, assuming we don't get an appropriate response under law. So we'll be on it as soon as we're able. So you've got this tremendous information of Biden family racketeering. Now, of course, Joe, they haven't gotten Joe's bank records. And I don't know if he's been asked why he hasn't gotten Joe's bank records, but I would suggest that ought to be next on the list, if it already isn't. Certainly there's enough here to begin an impeachment inquiry of Joe Biden. Don't you agree? And I'd like to know why it hasn't started. And I don't think the Republicans have a good excuse not to have done that, given everything that's going on. In addition, we have new information about election interference and the efforts by the deep state to try to help Joe Biden during the election while hurting Donald Trump. And the information concerns the efforts by Anthony Blinken, who is now Secretary of State, and other folks in the Clinton campaign, but a Freudian slip, I guess, right? The Biden campaign. Maybe I should just call it the Biden-Obama-Clinton campaign. I mean, it's just all the same people, just different heads. So Jim Jordan, so last week has been a big week for government reports, and I got to hand it to Jordan and Comer. They don't sit on the information when they find it. They get it out. I mean, Comer got these records as soon as he was able to kind of go through them and understand them and ensure that he had everything he was likely to get in the short or medium term. He produced the information to the American people. He didn't sit on it for a year or two. Same thing goes with Jim Jordan. They're producing information about what they're finding to the American people in a timely way, which is a marked difference than previous Republican investigations. Now, Jordan's been investigating the deep state, I call it deep state, but essentially it was the Biden operation, using these 51 folks, most of whom had security clearances, to try to falsely distract, with false accusations that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russia disinformation. And in fact, it wasn't. And their statement that was seemingly taken as neutral by the, seemingly put out as neutral, wasn't neutral. It was generated as a result of Anthony Blinken and the Biden campaign. And so we've talked about that a little bit. But that's come out is that the CIA may have been directly involved in pushing out this election interference. According to what Jim Jordan has uncovered in this new report, he says the committees have evidence that an employee affiliated with the CIA may have assisted in obtaining signatories for the statement. One signer of the statement, former CIA analyst David Cariens, I think it's Cariens, disclosed to the committees that a CIA employee affiliated with the agency's pre-publication classification review board informed him of the existence of the statement and asked if he would sign it. The committees have requested additional materials from the CIA, which has ignored the request to date. Now, and also on top of that, I don't know if it's in this report, I think it's in this report, the CIA also accelerated the approval of the letter that dissembled on the Hunter Biden laptop. So this Mike Morrell, who was a Democrat operative, former acting CIA chief at one point, implicated in Benghazi, he had asked for a quick turnaround by this review board, and I think he got it. Now, those of us who've had experiences, I know Judicial Watch has had experiences in dealing with these review boards. They're usually a bureaucratic morass, especially on sensitive political issues. So in addition to accelerating, it looks like for political reasons, this letter to try to help Joe Biden, they were also soliciting signatures. So you had the CIA directly involved in our election processes and election debates. Because as Jordan highlights, the public statements by 51 former intelligence officials was a political operation to help elect Vice President Biden in the 2020 presidential election. The Biden campaign took active measures to discredit the allegations about Hunter Biden by exploiting the national security credentials of the former intelligence officials. Blinken's outreach to Morrell, he had called Mike Morrell basically to get him on board here, was the impetus for the public statement. The Biden campaign coordinated dissemination of the statement to members of the media, and as I said, they have information that the CIA may have helped move this all along. So we have the CIA, again, involved in, we already know the CIA has been involved in censorship to help Biden, censorship to help the deep state push the vaccines and things like that and anything else that got in their way through the Twitter files. But now we know the CIA, there's evidence the CIA was involved in election interference in the 2020 campaign. And I know there's this debate. Well, is this debate about voter fraud in the 2020 campaign and whether that had an impact? The other debate about the election in 2020 is whether now has to be is the involvement of our national security agencies and people who have security clearances to help suppress information about a candidate, Joe Biden, and make another candidate look bad, Donald Trump. That's election interference. So that's why there's this debate about the 2020 election, and it isn't going to go away. And so these 51 members, these 51 folks, they need to be investigated. In the least, I would look into the next honest president taking away all their security clearances. I think Trump wanted to do that against John Brennan, who was one of the signers here. And I think they backed off because of the litigation that might ensue. But there's got to be a way of checking this. There's got to be consequences for abusing the trust you have from the American people, a national security clearance, and then use the fact you have a security clearance and this expertise and when you have a security clearance, the presumption is you still have access to secret information, right? So you know better. You know secrets that inform your public statements on national security matters. Here, they pretended they had all of this expertise when in fact they were just acting as Biden campaign fronts. And messing with our elections and abusing their security clearances to do so. So don't you think they ought to have those security clearances removed? I think so. I think so for sure. You know, Trump is the most abused political figure in the modern era, certainly here in the United States. When you see what's happening to him in New York with the really abusive and reckless and unprecedented targeting of him by Alvin Bragg. You see how he's being abused there. You saw with this jury verdict. And, you know, I don't understand a jury verdict. Maybe I'm dumb, right? I don't understand how a jury can say, well, this woman wasn't raped, or the preponderance of evidence shows that she wasn't raped, and then go after the Trump for defaming her by denying he raped her. Forgive me for being confused about that. And of course, a lot of her claims were in court because the New York legislature passed a law to eliminate the statute of limitations for a year, because this incident allegedly took place 30 years ago, and it was widely recognized they were doing it to get Trump, to give this woman, Carol, an opportunity to litigate against Trump. Not all of her claims, but key components of the claims. So he's an enemy of the state. He's an enemy of the state in New York, and he's an enemy of the state here in Washington, D.C. And the left doesn't want him to defend himself. You see this in reaction to his appearance on CNN. He was there as a presidential candidate. It was a town hall up in New Hampshire, I guess, with Republicans. And the left was furious because Trump was aggressive in defending himself. He said things they don't like. They pretended everything he said was a, quote, a lie, and he needed to be fact-checked when, in my view, much of what he said was materially true. I mean, they pretend because he gets a detail wrong here or there, a detail, in my view, that's typically irrelevant to the larger point, that he needs to be fact-checked. And the American people see through that. And I know they see through that, which is why they don't like him speaking at all. And I think the reaction to his CNN speech is going to be more abuse. You know, he's already being abused with the prosecution in New York. He's probably going to get indicted in Fulton County, Georgia by Democrats for daring to dispute and exercise his First Amendment rights and do his job as president there over the election. You know, they're telling us to forget the 2020 election while they're trying to jail Trump for doing everything he's able to do under law to dispute the 2020 election. So which is it, folks? Are we supposed to forget it and not talk about it? Or do we spend our entire next 2 years presidential campaign talking about it because they're trying to jail the guy for disputing the last election? And of course, here in Washington, D.C., you have this special counsel that the Garland DOJ has stick on Trump for, again, his activities related to disputing an election under law, exercising First Amendment speech, and this fake document story dispute that they've manufactured against Trump. Now, Trump, again, was raising issues and defenses about the document case, and what was her name, Caitlin Collins, was saying, well, she read the Presidential Records Act, and he's wrong. I'm going to repeat again. President Trump is correct about his interpretation of the Presidential Records Act and what it allows him to do, and virtually every legal expert or those who pretend to be legal experts and media voices like Caitlin Collins are wrong about it. Now, how do I know that Trump is right? Because Judicial Watch has, first of all, 30 years experience almost in litigating presidential records disputes. So our expertise, I dare say, is second to none. Secondly, we had litigation specifically on this issue when we asked for the Presidential Records Act to be applied to Clinton tapes that Bill Clinton had, where he was recorded talking to foreign government leaders and members of Congress. And we thought at the time, this is 10, 12 years ago now, I think, 2009 maybe, we found out about it. Well, maybe these are presidential records. Why aren't they being cataloged as such and made available? And we went to the archives. The archives says no. Justice Department says no. And a federal court said no to us. And what did the archives and the Justice Department and the court all agree upon? That the president had discretion as to what to classify as records, whether to classify records as personal or presidential. And the archives, certainly after a presidency, had no way of second-guessing the president. In fact, because we thought these records were classified because they were talking, he had recordations, according to reports of Clinton talking to foreign leaders, that stuff is presumptively classified. The Justice Department said, well, that includes, and the court included, it necessarily includes declassification. If you call them personal, they're declassified, and the president has that ultimate constitutional authority. He's the #1 declassification authority in the federal government. And his decisions to declassify records, which he can do by saying, I want to declassify them, or effectively by showing them to someone who doesn't have authority to review them otherwise, meaning let's say there's a guest in the Oval Office, or maybe a foreign leader, and he says, I got this map here. I want to show it to you because I'm trying to do my job. It's declassified. And the Justice Department told the court in our Clinton sock drawer case, as it's been famously known since, if the president has records after he leaves office, they're presumptively personal. And they did a 180 when it came to Trump. So they've been lying to the American people, frankly misleading the courts, about the legal status of those records. So every time you say Trump had classified records, that's in dispute. That he had government records, that's in dispute. Why is it in dispute? Because the prior position of the Justice Department was the complete opposite. The prior position of the National Archives was the complete opposite when it came to Bill Clinton. And then it turns out President Biden had records from his days as vice president. They didn't raid his home, even though his lawyers were playing games. They didn't publicize those records immediately, even though they knew about them as they were harassing Trump with leaks and vicious other smears. And he has records from his days as Senate. Still no raid, still no grand jury investigation, still no harassment of all the president's men and women like they're doing to Trump, even though allegedly there's a special counsel looking at it. So thank you, CNN, for giving me a chance to go over how abusive the records case that's being pursued in federal court in an effort to try to jail Trump is. Now, the special counsel hasn't made any decisions whether to charge him or not, but you know where they want to go, right? You know where they want to go. He's still sniffing around this issue. It's an easy call. Frankly, there should be an investigation of the abuse of Trump by the archives and the Justice Department and the FBI, not only concocting this dispute about records, but then using it as a pretext to raid his home. So we've got much litigation on this. We're in the middle of it, folks, in more ways than you can imagine. The media likes to blame me for, Trump doing this. It's ridiculous. It's the law. Court decisions saying you can't second guess the president. Oh, Tom Fitton told Trump this. Well, first of all, they don't know what they're talking about. But B, I told you what the law is. I told you what the prior Justice Department positions have been. and there's no rational or reasonable response to what I've said. Talk about the big lie. That's part of the big lie. So we've got some good news. Let's move on to some good news here. Now, Judicial Watch, again, is a national leader in trying to preserve free and fair elections here in the United States. One of the key ways we do that is by trying to enforce the National Voter Registration Act, which is a federal law that in part requires states to take reasonable steps to clean up the rolls. And because the left has zero interest in making sure election rolls are clean, because in my view, they want to be able to steal elections, it's been up to Judicial Watch to actually enforce the law. And thankfully, the law allows for private aggrieved parties to try to enforce the law. And Judicial Watch had filed the first lawsuits in the history of the law in terms of private enforcement. And we were quite successful in getting Indiana and Ohio initially to clean up their rolls after our litigation. I think we just ended the lawsuits or settled up there. I think we settled in Indiana. And then Ohio did what we wanted to do, so we ended the lawsuit. No, excuse me. We settled in, we settled in Ohio, and Indiana did what we wanted them to do. Because the Ohio settlement was challenged by the left, and the Supreme Court upheld Judicial Watch's analysis. And so we sued in California, we sued in Kentucky, we sued in North Carolina, we sued New York City. And we've been successful in all those jurisdictions. New York City settled with us. They removed 440,000 names from the rolls in the last year. The first big settlement was in New York, was in California, Los Angeles County, 1.2 million names. North Carolina, a few 100,000 down near 400,000, I think, or so. Kentucky, the names, at least 250,000, probably 500,000 as a result of a consent decree. And Colorado settled with us as well. They removed a bunch of names. And we just settled this week with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, who admitted in court filings that it removed 178,000 names. And so that happened after we warned them about what was going on. The litigation continued, and we finally settled in a way that commits Pennsylvania and 5 key counties to extensive public reporting and statistics regarding the ongoing voter roll cleanup efforts there for the next 5 years, along with a payment of $15,000 to Judicial Watch. It doesn't cover all of our legal costs, but it's significant. I think it's a nice chunk of change, especially since we're a nonprofit. Otherwise, we'd have to raise it from you in order to help defray our legal costs. In November 2021, Judicial Watch filed an amended complaint. We had filed an earlier complaint, I think in 2020 or 2019. And the counties we had targeted, we said, you're not removing names. And the county said, Judicial Watch is wrong. And we said, we're not wrong. Look at your federal data reporting. And they said, oh, well, you're wrong because we reported wrong information to the federal data. We actually did what you wanted us to do. Like, well, I mean, that's the way Pennsylvania had approached this initially. So we caught them giving the wrong information to the feds, and they blamed us for that. I love it. But nevertheless, there were other counties who still were not cleaning up their rolls in a way that we thought was appropriate, and certainly not reporting in a way that the law required. If they're not reporting, if they're not telling us what they're doing to clean up the rolls, how do we know if the voter rolls are clean? So despite our asking them and warning them about voting, the cleaning up the rolls, and then trying immediately almost to remove 178,000 names, we still had to kind of battle them in court, and we finally were able to settle. So to their credit, they settled with us. Now, I can complain about the rolls not being clean, but I think it's very interesting that these liberal jurisdictions, none of these jurisdictions want to be sued by Judicial Watch. I don't know if Kentucky is a liberal jurisdiction. Colorado, it's mixed. But New York City, they're not fans of Judicial Watch. Los Angeles County and the state of California are not fans of Judicial Watch. But they know what the law is. And so, to their credit, rather than continuously and maliciously waste taxpayer dollars, they settle and agree to abide by the law. And the law generally requires, this is pretty simple. The fact it's not being done or it's not being tracked appropriately is not excusable, especially in this day and age. If you don't show up to vote in an election, typically a federal election, typically the state covered by the National Voter Registration Act or the county is supposed to send you a postcard. Hey, let's say it's me. Hey, Tom, where are you? You didn't vote last time. Are you still at your address? Let us know. And if I don't respond over the next two federal election cycles, meaning the next 4 years, or otherwise vote, they take my name off the rolls. The assumption is I've moved away or died or otherwise became ineligible to vote. You know, it's a simple process, and we have to sue oftentimes to get them to follow it. I mean, sometimes they send out the cards and don't remove the names, or sometimes they don't send out the cards at all. So Pennsylvania has agreed in this settlement agreement to publish the total number of registered and eligible voters, active and inactive, meaning those who have fallen away and aren't voting anymore, in the 5 counties by June 30th of each year on their Department of State's website, the Pennsylvania Department of State's website, for the next 5 years. So every June 30th, we're going to get this specific reporting that otherwise is really quite difficult to get. It also agreed to publish the total number of address confirmation notices, those postcards I'm telling you about, sent to registered voters, and the number returned as undeliverable or not responded to. So if we send the postcard, or we get, they send out the postcard and it's returned as undeliverable, it suggests someone's moved, and it's obviously not responded to. It further suggests someone has moved and is no longer eligible to vote in the jurisdiction. It will also publish the total number of voters removed from the registration rolls on the account of death, or for failing to respond to an address confirmation notice and failing to vote in the 2 most recent federal general elections. So we're going to get details about how they're cleaning up the rolls in Pennsylvania, and we'll be seeing if they're not doing what they're supposed to do. Obviously, we can take legal steps to ensure that happens. So this is just a great outcome because, we send the notice letters. This is what happens. We send notice letters, and thankfully, even the notice letter results in voter rolls being cleaned up. In Pennsylvania and Allegheny County, one of the notice letters, and we never sued Allegheny County because this is how they responded. They removed immediately upon receipt of our letter 69,000 outdated registrations. According to a January 14th CBS News report, this mountain of faulty registrations has now courted the attention of the conservative watchdog group Judicial Watch. David Voy, elections manager for the county, told CBS, "I would concede that we are behind on culling our rolls, and that this has been put on the back burner." And then they later confirmed to Judicial Watch specifically that the removals had occurred. So we were right, and we didn't have to sue Allegheny County. We just had to send them a letter saying, we looked at the numbers, you're not cleaning them up as you're supposed to. Now, with this mass use of mail-in balloting to vote, we obviously need to doubly make sure the voting rolls are accurate. You don't want to be sending content, ballots, or certainly someone who's on the list. That becomes an opportunity for fraud, because if someone's on the list who shouldn't be there, someone can more easily vote in their name. Let's say they've moved, right? And someone moves into their place. They get material suggesting, they're still getting mail, for instance, Joe Smith, you're still there, and, the other guy says, well, Joe Smith isn't here, I'm going to vote in his name. But that's why you got to clean up the rolls. The reason the law requires to clean up the rolls isn't because the feds are being jerks. It's because they recognize dirty voting rolls can mean dirty elections. Cleaner voting rolls mean cleaner elections. And as a result of Judicial Watch, we're going to have cleaner elections in Pennsylvania, in Colorado, in New York, in California, in North Carolina, and in Kentucky. I think I'm getting all the big ones. And of course, we've sent out warning letters to many other states that have resulted in cleanups. Florida, for instance, they cleaned up a ton of names after we alerted them to issues. Texas cleaned up a bunch of names after we alerted them to issues. So this is all just great, isn't it? I mean, because no one else is doing this. The Justice Department, I mean, under Trump, they helped a little bit in Kentucky, but didn't do much else. The Biden Justice Department is completely AWOL when it comes to enforcing election integrity. They're actually on the other side legally, suing people who want voter ID. They're not going to be cleaning up the rolls. So this is all just great work. Pennsylvania election rolls are cleaner and will remain cleaner thanks to Judicial Watch. This federal lawsuit settlement is good news for voters in Pennsylvania who want to ensure that only eligible voters are on voter rolls. Judicial Watch's remarkable run of litigation successes resulted in well over 2 million ineligible registrations being removed from voter rolls across the nation in the last year or two. 2 million names, thanks to little old Judicial Watch. I mean, you want to talk about heavy lifting for clean elections? 2 million names. That wasn't done by the Justice Department. That wasn't done by a political party. That was done by a nonprofit educational foundation, your Judicial Watch. And so there's going to be a spate of new data coming out later this year. And you can be sure if states and counties aren't cleaning up the rolls as the law requires, as indicated by the data they're producing to the federal government and other analyses we bring to bear, we're going to do more. So more is coming. But the good news is, you do enough of this, the jurisdictions begin to take notice saying, well, why don't we just do what we know we're going to get nailed on if we don't do it? So it's a significant public benefit, public interest benefit. So a lot more coming also on election integrity. We still have this big case in Illinois that we're pursuing over the Illinois state law that allows the counting of ballots that arrive for up to 2 weeks after Election Day. 2 weeks after Election Day. And ballots that sometimes can be they don't even have to have postmarks. I mean, first of all, does that sound right as a matter of common sense? Of course not. But it also isn't right as a matter of federal law, which is why we have this civil rights lawsuit in federal court that we're pursuing. So we're cleaning up the rolls, trying to make sure elections are run fairly and honestly and in compliance with federal law, and also trying to battle illicit gerrymanders, which allow politicians to rig elections by ensuring that only certain people of a political party are in a jurisdiction and are able to effectively exercise their vote. In Maryland, for instance, they essentially eliminated the ability of the Republican Party to be able to contest Congress in any congressional district, contest a race. We came in and said that's not right under Maryland constitutional law, and we won. And they had to go back and rejigger everything. So I just love Judicial Watch. We're doing this great work for clean elections, and I know you're all concerned about election integrity, but we're doing what we can under the law to fix it. And there's a lot of other things that need to be done, and I will just want to repeat the reforms that I think need to be made. And if you live in a state where all this is done, more power to you, but I doubt you do. Election day, we should encourage people to vote on Election Day, not vote for weeks prior to an election and count ballots for weeks after an election. We should eliminate all in emergency circumstances, mail-in balloting, unsupervised voting. We should require voter ID, and I mean strict voter ID. It can't be, well, I have this magazine I received, it has my address, does that count? No, that shouldn't count. I'm exaggerating, but a utility bill isn't good enough in my view. It ought to be a photo ID. They should confirm you are a citizen before you're eligible to vote, certainly to register to vote or to vote. That isn't done I'm not aware of it being done effectively anywhere. Maybe one state that does it, but practically speaking, it isn't done. Obviously, ballot harvesting, turning ballots over to third parties. That's an abomination in terms of clean elections. So those are the other reforms that we should be pushing for, and you should be pushing for, in my view, in your individual states. But you can be sure from the big picture, where we can, at the national and state level, we'll be trying to enforce federal law and other laws as it pertains to clean elections as well. So just great work there. Just great, great work. By Judicial Watch. I say it because I'm president of Judicial Watch, but, come on. Any citizen should be appreciative of this. So another success of Judicial Watch, and of course Judicial Watch is known, for those of you who don't follow us, for using the Freedom of Information Act. We are the #1 FOIA requester in the United States, FOIA litigator in the United States. There's no one who does more for transparency in government, to expose what our government is up to, than Judicial Watch. Thousands of Freedom of Information Act requests, probably nearly 1,000 Freedom of Information Act lawsuits. There's nothing like it, not only here in America, but in the world. And, sometimes we ask for modest stuff, sometimes we ask for big stuff. We exposed the Clinton emails, the Obama IRS abuses, the abuses of Trump. But then there's this kind of petty, nasty corruption where the government is just arrogant and doesn't want to tell you what it's doing, even if the monies spent are arguably modest. But John Kerry, former senator, former presidential candidate, former Secretary of State, who, by the way, was implicated in the abuse of Trump, misusing State Department resources to try to target him. He is the climate envoy for Joe Biden. Now, I could go on and on about the climate scam and why it's just a waste to even have a climate envoy, but that's not why you're tuning in. Or maybe it is. We'll do that another time. But he's flying around, and no one knows what he does. What's his job duties and responsibilities? Who works for him? How much money are we spending? And so it was up to Judicial Watch to do this sort of basic oversight. I'm pleased to see James Comer is following our lead and asking similar questions, at least he has recently. So we finally got a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit out after we sued. Let's see, when did we sue? We sued back in 2022, September. And what happens is they give us batches of documents, which is just another outrage. They tell you, oh, we've got 1,000 documents, we'll give you 250 a month. So you got to wait months. And if it's a lot of documents, you have to wait years. And then you go back and start arguing over the documents they didn't give you, years after they started giving them to you. That's our life here at Judicial Watch and trying to get FOIA records out. I mean, it ain't easy. So the secrets of the Biden administration include what the organizational chart of John Kerry's office. And we had to file a federal lawsuit, and they've been giving us these documents in drips and drabs, as I said. And one of the documents we found is the organizational chart. Maybe we'll pop it up. I don't think we can do it live. We'll do it subsequent. We'll provide a link below. The organizational chart is titled Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, Big Picture Org Chart. I think of the big board from, what's the name of the movie? You know the movie. I
can't remember. Sorry.
You know what I mean by the big board. If you guys have to look it up while I'm talking and tell me later. Look up the big board. The Kubrick film. The positions include. Now you see, this is why This is the problem of doing it live. If I weren't doing it live, I could stop the filming and figure out what movie I'm trying to remember. Dr. Strangelove. There we are. You see, now live I was reminded of what the movie is. They had the big board, right? And the Russian ambassador came in and the general said, oh, we can't let them see the big board. Well, anyway, there's the big org chart, right? The big picture org chart. 8 full-time employees, 28 3161s, which are temporary direct hires that are commonly referred as 3161, which is a federal law, 5 U.S.C. 3161, 3 detailees, which means these are government officials somewhere working somewhere else who are detailed to the office, 2 fellows. Fellows are kind of the academic side of it. 1 Intergovernmental Personnel Act position, and 3 contractor positions. So 45 employees are working on Kerry's staff. The chart shows Kerry and his personal staff at the his personal staff assistant at the top of the chart, with 3 separate divisions reporting to him, including a chief of staff, principal deputy envoy for climate, and a deputy envoy for climate. A principal deputy envoy for climate and a deputy envoy for climate. Additional offices reporting to the 3 divisions include the public affairs, communications, and stakeholder engagement. Now, stakeholder engagement, that's where the government officials are spending all their time talking to the extremist environmentalists that are trying to destroy our energy infrastructure and essentially under the guise of the climate scam, decimate humanity. Liaison to the National Climate Task Force, Implementation and Ambition Team, Negotiations Team, Global Innovation and Competitive Team, Public Finance Team, and Private Finance and Multinational Corporate Strategy Team. So lots of opportunities for corruption, even in the here, detailed. You can tell just by the names of the various groups and on the org chart just where all the opportunities for corruption and misconduct are. The Boston Herald reported in April that, as I said, James Comer is threatening his subpoena power to see exactly what Kerry, the special envoy for climate, is up to. He sent a letter to Blinken and requested details of his climate office budget, a list of employees, communications with third parties, and travel records. This is all what we're Judicial Watch has requested under our lawsuit, as best I can recall. So good for Comer in following up on this. Real clear investigations. I talked to the reporter. He was frustrated because he had filed a request for the breakdown of how Kerry's office spent its approximately $16 million in 2022, and the State Department said they couldn't comply with his request until April of 2025. So in the next presidential administration, we will find out how much John Kerry spent in 2022. Or not where he spent the money, not how much he spent. It is incredible that it took a Judicial Watch federal lawsuit to find out that Kerry's bloated climate office astonishingly employs at least 45 people, and that we still have no idea what he or his staff are doing under the law. The ongoing stonewalling about what Kerry does shows the Biden administration's contempt for transparency, accountability, and the basic right of the American people to know how their tax dollars are spent. So we're talking about a budget of $16 million, and we are having to file a federal lawsuit to get information about who he's employing, and we still don't have the details of what he does or what his people do on a day-to-day basis. Now, I want you to know the budget deficit, or the budget total, these days is well north of $4 trillion. It's more than that. Well, how do you think everything else is being managed in this town? It's even worse. So these are inhuman amounts of money that are being spent, and no one's watching the store. No one's watching the store. The Republicans have come up, for instance, with this debt limit response, which I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's sufficient, but it's relatively moderate and modest. Like $5 trillion in savings off of a deficit of $60 trillion or something crazy like that. Really modest. And the Biden administration and their left media allies are pretending that they're trying to destroy our whole budget. But there are trillions of dollars being spent with virtually no oversight, and in a very sensitive area here, not a lot of money, relatively speaking, for the federal government. They want zero oversight. As Kerry drives or flies around the world, the hypocrisy of that, given the alleged climate issues, is self-evident, to try to reorganize the human condition based on the climate scam, as I call it. and it's a little old Judicial Watch, again, doing what Congress ought to do. I'm glad Comer's trying to do it as well. But there is a lot more to do. We can't, even though we file thousands of Freedom of Information Act lawsuits, hundreds of FOIA lawsuits, we are only scratching the surface of what the government is up to. So if you like what we're doing in terms of election integrity, defending the rule of law, trying to stop the collapse of the republic under the weight of the Biden illegal immigration invasion, then you should be supporting Judicial Watch. I encourage you to go to our website at judicialwatch.org, judicialwatch.org. We're all over social media, and support our work. Get the word out about what we're doing, share the wealth of information, and dare I say it, share your wealth with Judicial Watch as we try to save the country. Thank you very much, and I'll see you here next time on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.